a good survey is, for any political campaign, should be a foundational aspect of the campaign that is done early on and then periodically updated.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason: to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. This week, we're talking to Lee Vasche, founder of Triton Polling and Research. They are a full-service survey and polling and market research firm with offices around the United States, but focused out in the West Side, and Lee's actually from Bend, Oregon. From nonprofits to Fortune 500 companies to statewide campaigns, Triton has done at least a little bit of everything out there. They've helped all types of different organizations focused on research, polling, and surveys. Lee has an eclectic mix of talents ranging from statistical analysis and advanced telecom systems to political organizing and database administration. And outside the office, he maintains that eclectic lifestyle by spending a lot of time traveling the world with his bride, Courtney, skiing, scuba diving, and enjoying the outdoors whenever he can get out of the office and away from a computer. We're going to cover a lot of ground in the interview today, but the main areas we're going to focus are on ballot access and grassroots organizing. If you're going to win, you got to get on the ballot, and a lot of candidates get that access through gathering petition signatures. And doing it the wrong way leads to a lot of headaches, but Lee has had a whole lot of experience doing it the right way and getting things done. And on the grassroots side, we're going to crack open Lee's knowledge bank and get some of his top tips for organizing your ground efforts, maximizing your efficiency, and hitting your targets. Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Raz. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to talking about some of this stuff. It's not often the sexiest of topics and the things that we do in our company day to day, but I'm honored that you care enough to have me on. So appreciate it.
Well, I see a huge value in learning more about these things. And, a lot of our listeners they're current candidates, or they're folks that are looking to run in the near future, or they're, they're kind of in the same positions, but for campaign staff and support. And this is an area that, because it's not sexy, it doesn't get a whole lot of airtime, and not a whole lot of people have as nearly as in-depth a knowledge of it as you do. But when it comes down to it, if you're not on the ballot, if you don't have a good grassroots organization, you're not going to win your race. And I mean, if you're not on the ballot, you're not even have a race. So I think they're really, really important things. And thankfully, our audience is really tuned in to wanting to learn these types of things, even though they're not the sexy stuff that Fox News talks about. So, let's kick it off by talking a little bit about your background, where you come from, how you got involved in politics, and kind of fill out your eclectic job background.
Sure. I got my start in politics and organizing in the college Republicans. So I approach most of this from sort of a center-right standpoint, and I'm actually registered as an independent these days. But I was state chair of the college Republicans in my state, and learned how to recruit people, how to get sign-ups for meetings, how to raise money, and that sort of thing, and get people involved in campaigns, motivating volunteers, et cetera, which is just the most basic nuts and bolts stuff everyone does that's involved in political campaigns. And just one thing led to another in terms of setting up phone banks where we would call all of the 0-4, 1-4, 2-4 low propensity voters, getting them to turn in their ballots, and all of the mechanics that go with that. And steadily did each election cycle as a volunteer, kept organizing larger and larger get out the vote efforts revolving around a phone bank, and some door to door, primarily over the phone. And ultimately, one year we had 60, 70 seat call center we set up. We developed our own software that ran that call center, and it was pretty much the biggest get out the vote Republican operation in Oregon history.
Wow, that's awesome.
That we executed in 2010. And then from that, I decided I've learned how to do all of this stuff, and I enjoy math and statistics, and so I start doing survey research, which is basically a way to take phone calls and turn something, make it a lot more valuable, and offer useful insights and analysis to businesses, campaigns, and so on. And so since 2010, I've been in the primarily in the survey research world, conducting campaign polling, but market research and almost any kind of survey one could imagine over the phone, online, even door to door. So every survey is different with a different set of problems and challenges, and as is every campaign. And so what we do is really enjoyable. It's not the most exciting at times, but very challenging. And we love working with political campaigns. I think political surveys are by far the most interesting work that we do. And our company is very good at doing all types of political surveys, whether it's brush fire, basic head-to-head matchups, tracking where you are on a few different issues and head-to-head. But we are very good at benchmark surveys where a campaign can test all of the different messaging, pro and con, on the candidate, or if it's an issue. I've got lots of experience in the ballot measure world, testing issues for and against ballot measures and ballot titles, and then our secret sauce is we are able to produce the sample, that mix of Republicans, Democrats, what cities they're in, and so on. Our samples are very representative. We use weighting, but also just in our strategies to make sure we get the right mix of Republicans, Democrats, independents, and millennials and seniors. Mm-hmm. All of that, I think we are really good at. And so that's my elevator pitch, I guess, in terms of our company and what we do and my background. And then I do have another area where I work in signature gathering, helping candidates get on the ballot, also helping issues to get on the ballot. And most of that has been primarily in Oregon, but we have worked in other states as well.
Now, a lot of our listeners, anybody that's turned on Fox News or tracked elections, they know at least generally what polling is, but there's some differences between some of the polling you see on MSNBC and Fox News and the idea of surveys. Talk a little bit about the mechanics of what a survey is for you guys and how that actually helps a campaign, what it does for them.
Most of the surveys that we read in the news are conducted by just a handful of survey companies that I don't even necessarily understand where their funding comes from to do these surveys. Maybe the media organizations are paying for them, but they're conducting very simplistic surveys. What is the approval rating of the president, and what do people think on a couple of different issues, and often people go and look at the samples and very easily pick them apart in terms of too many of this, too many of that. And so that's most of the polling that 99% of people are familiar with, is just what the surveys that the media conduct. But in reality, most of the polls out there, you never see the results. You may get the call to participate, but it's all done privately. And it's done to develop strategies, messaging, targeting. In a good survey is, for any political campaign, should be a foundational aspect of the campaign that is done early on and then periodically updated and there's a whole lot of reasons why you have to do that. And a campaign that doesn't conduct polling, and maybe we're not talking about running for city council, but certainly as you move up, plenty of starting at county commission and certainly in most states legislative races up to statewide races, polling is you may win if you're the incumbent that's been in office for a very long time with name ID, but in a competitive election, a campaign is, you're driving around without your headlights on if you don't have survey data to tell you where to go, what issues are moving voters, what issues aren't. Often you think an issue sounds great and is persuasive, and the whole campaign everybody involved may agree with that, but it can be a feedback loop where everyone just self-reinforces what everyone else thinks. Whereas a survey, you go out and do it right with a good mix of random voters. You have very well-written questions that there may be bias in those questions, but they're done in such a way that you get true opinions. You gauge honest sentiment from voters. That survey, and you throw everything against the wall often in a good questionnaire. You want to test your best messages, but also some of the weaker ones. And you want to, of course, test the messages that are, that the opposition is going to use. That is often the most important, which is uncomfortable for lots of candidates and campaigns to want to come up with, in a sense, bludgeon themselves with negative messaging from the other side in their survey. But you have to do that because you got to expose your weaknesses and how strong of messaging does the opposition have. And you put all this together in a well-constructed survey. What I feel is one of our trademarks is you can't tell who the survey is coming from. Right. It hits so hard on either side that at the end of the survey, the person thinks, "Wow, I don't know what to think, for it or against it."
Yeah, who are they calling for?
Because that gets you the data you need and answers the questions you need to win, or at least have a chance to win. And so that's when we go to write a survey, working with a campaign from the beginning. Drafting that questionnaire is that's where most of the effort needs to go, and creating a good poll. And then you got to have very good methodology, some of which I touched on earlier. But a good questionnaire, good methodology, you're going to have, that survey should turn out very helpful to you in a way that can guide the campaign, all the way to Election Day.
Well, and the idea behind every single question you ask is the feedback, the data you get, that's going to inform an action, right? You're going to use this. It's going to help you create that roadmap for how you actually go communicate to the voters. So everything ties back specifically to that action steps.
That's right. Look, what is a campaign? It's going to be, whether you're sending out direct mail pieces, you're making a phone call, you're knocking at the door, what are you going to say? Each one of those mail pieces, what are the messages it's going to touch on? And a campaign's no different than a roulette, at the casino. What are you going to put? You're going to put your chips on what numbers and what colors? Well, the survey tells you which ones have the highest odds.
Yes.
Which ones give you the maximum chance to win? And so now it's not totally random, or often our instincts are wrong.
Yeah, that's always what surprises me sometimes. Even doing this as long as I have, when you don't have the real numbers, if a candidate asks me, okay, so what should be my talking points? Well, if I'm just coming up with them and I don't have any kind of research or any numbers to back up what's actually moving people, then all of my own personal biases are skewing things. And so I'm going to talk about the issues that I care about. I'm going to talk about what I think the voters will, but it's skewed internally in myself. And so I got to have that outside feedback from voters to say, okay, what are the issues that are actually going to move me, and how do you present those issues in order to move a specific type of voter?
Right, and you and I are not representative of average voters. We are the furthest thing possible from that average family sitting down. That's maybe they watch a few commercials, maybe they look at a direct mail piece, but they're making snap decisions, and based off of what the very, very tiny amounts of information they may pick up over those closing weeks before Election Day. And when you have such a narrow window to communicate your message, it sure as heck has to be the most powerful message to move that particular person. And that's what good survey data will do, is allow you to place your bets on the highest odds to have the best chance of winning. And I've seen this work many, 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 many times. And this is how you move numbers. This is how campaigns go from -10, -20, and win. Because you use effective messages, you persuade voters. And then if everything's sort of working in concert towards a terrific strategy based off great research, that is how campaigns win tough races.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that don't get the survey research, that don't have any kind of data to base those arguments on, their approach is to try to brute force it, to have as much, to put all their effort, all their fuel, all the money behind the thing, they put all that on the roulette spots that they think is going to hit. And what happens, I mean, sometimes in some cases you can brute force it, but generally speaking, we're talking about communication, right? And so just talking louder is not going to make a difference. If anything, that's going to turn people off. You got to use proven communication strategies to actually go after what they care about and communicate how you can, solve the problems that they feel, how you can deal with the issues that keep them up at night. And there's really no substitute for good research to know exactly what those are. And it imbues the whole campaign with a sense of confidence that says what we're doing is working, because we know it, because we've tested it, because we talked to voters, and it's actively moving people in our direction.
Yes, agree. And I would just add that issues, what is a good issue, what isn't, powerful issues can be, you can invent one overnight, and it can be something never even thought of. In Oregon, we have an issue that is interesting where the governor unilaterally put on hold, they didn't commute, but put on hold all death penalty cases in the state. So if you're an inmate on death row, it's on hold right now, unilaterally.
Wow.
And all the legislators, a few have gone on record, a few have not, but you go out and ask voters who have approved the death penalty in Oregon. It's not an issue anyone's talking about. It's been in the news a couple of times. You go and ask voters what they think about the governor overruling your vote and letting horrible, child killers, rapists, on and on, giving them a free pass right now and overriding your right to vote. That issue polls 70, 80%. Mm-hmm. People are furious. It cuts across party lines.
Yeah.
It's just an issue that we're sitting around thinking about. It's in the news. Well, you don't necessarily base your whole campaign on that.
Right.
But we test that. You see how strong it is. Well, you can add that into as one of the arrows in your campaign. That's just one example where and a survey can help you to identify those 60, 70, 80% issues where everyone's with you. You get your opponent on record with, on that position that's only 10, 20% or on their side, and you can just blow them out of the water over and over again from an angle that nobody saw coming.
Well, and that's such a powerful thing because in a lot of cases we have, let's look at like the Republican primary, you have 90% of the candidates out there saying the same things. I mean, you could just cut and paste the talking points and those arrows from one calling card to the other, because they're all just talking about the major issues that they see on the news and that their consultants have heard are important. But when you're able to use the survey research stuff and be able to go find those issues that you're talking about, that can provide a huge, unique asset to your campaign. And now all of a sudden, instead of following the leader and all the other hundreds of candidates that are talking about some of these issues, you're all of a sudden a thought leader. You're pushing and driving the issue, and you're the guy or the man or woman to talk about something because you're the one that made it a big issue. And it's beautiful.
It is. And that's what makes politics often a lot of fun, because you get to decide in a campaign, you get to decide the battlefield, and you can take the high ground if you're smart. Certainly most of the consultants out there, it's just the tired issues. Oh, we need to fight for education. We need to fight for jobs. Voters hear that and they shrug their shoulders because everyone says that. Take the high ground on an issue that nobody's necessarily thought of, but has an emotional connection, right? Emotions drive so much of people's decisions, especially when they're very quick snap decisions about who they're going to vote for. You take the high ground and you can just bludgeon your opponents and win. And there's just so many examples in particular race. You can always find these wedge issues where you can run up the score and win, and it just takes some creativity and a good game plan. But the numbers can change overnight, and I've seen it with surveys. We'll be doing tracking surveys like every 3 days. We're doing a new survey. And as one direct mail piece arrives that's just really hard hitting, let's say in a legislative race, the numbers will shift 5, 6, 7 points just from one day to the next, because people, they get something that's compelling and effective, and they don't have a lot of other information on this race, and they get this mailer that's just, they just can't believe that their opponent would take this position. You move the numbers, and we will see it day to day. An effective opposition will hit right back, and the numbers swing the other direction. But oftentimes, particularly at lower level races, you don't have a very effective opposition. And so you can win with a good strategy, and often all roads lead back to doing a good survey at the start to identify what persuades and what does not.
Now, even once you've got that research, you got to be on the ballot to actually get it to win a race. And the idea of ballot access and how you get that, talk a little bit about what ballot access is, how the petition gathering plays into that, and kind of explain why that's important to candidates and getting on the ballot.
So ballot access is a process. It's kind of a strange term. Not every state has this, but plenty do, where you have to collect signatures to run for office, or often you have to maybe you collect signatures to avoid paying a fee to file. Different reasons, but many states you have to go out and collect a lot of signatures, and Colorado is one of those states that we've been active in. And Colorado is very difficult because to run for the Republican or Democratic nomination, you have to collect signatures only from people of your own party, and then if it's a statewide issue, you have to collect them by congressional district, and you have to get so many valid signatures by district. And in fact, they've even changed it now. For some things, you have to get it by legislative district.
Oh my gosh!
And you have to get so many, and if you fail in one district, you lose everything.
Wow!
And
just to give a little bit of perspective to the listeners, that means that, like in Texas, if we had that rule, we have 150 state house seats. We have 34 congressional seats. That means that if it was a by congressional seat deal, let's say we had to get 1,000 signatures per congressional seat. That means that I can't just go get several thousand here in Dallas-Fort Worth. I'd have to go into each separate congressional district and get a specific number there. And having a very specific population you can get it from, if it's just Republican voters, that's a very, very tough, a very labor-intensive and cost-intensive matter.
So that's a worst-case scenario. States that have that sort of requirements, usually that's not often the case, but but you have to go out and collect signatures, and there's just so many different problems that can occur as you go through this process. And there have been some high-profile cases where people don't do it right and they don't make the ballot, and it's a humiliating, embarrassing situation. And some of those pitfalls, one is understanding the rules very, very clearly. It's easy. A lot of people may think they understand the rules, and perhaps there's gray area, and people will make assumptions on is correct and what is not to the signature gathering process, specifically in terms of like what will count as a valid signature and what will not. Some states require the petitions like that to be notarized, every single one. There's very specific rules for that notary. Any mistake that the notary makes, the whole packet of petitions can be thrown out. All kinds of little nuanced rules affect signature gathering, and it varies radically state by state. Understanding those rules is half of the battle. And you cannot make any assumptions. You have to work directly whatever election office you're dealing with, whether it's a state or county, being in very close contact with them and or your attorneys if needed, to understand precisely what the rules are and what will count towards a valid signature and what will get you disqualified. Focusing on the ones that get signatures disqualified are critical so that then you avoid that.
Right.
And do everything you can to make sure that your signatures are valid. So the rules are a huge component of this, and a lot of people in politics who are the kind of the know-it-all types with a big ego and they have all the answers, that can doom you with signature gathering because you think you understand it. It seems so simple, and then you missed, rule H, I, J, and K way down on this list, and the whole thing gets thrown out, and that has happened on numerous occasions. So the rules are important. Another is how are you going to get your signatures? You can use volunteers, and if depending on the dynamics of a campaign, maybe you have a lot of volunteers, maybe you don't. Signature gathering isn't very fun. most people can go and get their spouse and their kids and neighbors, maybe a few, coworkers, but after that, your pool of people that you can get a signature from dwindles. So how do you go and get more if you're a volunteer? And that's where things trickle off really quickly in terms of going door to door, or like working down at the post office, or getting in front of a Walmart and talking to people. That isn't very fun for most people just to go and do on their free time. And so most campaigns end up hiring paid circulators, people who get paid to do this and who have experience doing it, and in theory can do it more efficiently than a volunteer ever could. So you get it done quicker. It does cost, but you get the signatures you need, and hopefully when you hire someone that has experience, they're not going to make mistakes nearly as often as volunteers do. And that's the service that my company offers, is we work with lots of different paid circulators. Sometimes we hire people locally and train them. Other times we'll bring people in who have experience doing this, bring them into a state to collect signatures, and they work the campaign and then go home. We work both ways, and we become experts on the law and what are the rules. That's the first step we do. Even before we even bid on a job, I want to know what the rules are, because that will determine how hard this is going to be. Mm-hmm. And so those two aspects are sort of involved in the ballot access process. And then the third I would point that comes to mind just from a strategy standpoint is you always just have to plan for it to be much more difficult than you expect.
Yeah.
Because it almost always is.
Yeah, I've only done a couple petition signature gathering initiatives that I've run, but it's a deceptively simple process, as you mentioned. I mean, the rules are they're not very forgiving. Even in the cases where they're fairly easy, small mistakes can get a large amount of hours of work kicked down the tube. And so you've absolutely got to make sure that you understand the rules, that you get a legal opinion on them if necessary. Make sure that you're in the clear. I mean, in Texas, once you get your form, you have to get your form approved to make sure that that's a valid form. You got to get your language legally approved. There are certain fields that the volunteer can fill out versus what the actual voter has to fill out. There's a lot of different things there. And if you're running for local office, I mean, it's totally within your capacity to go out there and get these signatures, especially because some of these local folks, when you've got months of lead time, you can go get the signatures to get you on the ballot at the same time as you're surveying voters and doing your initial ID. And that can work very, very well and can oftentimes help kind of you get two birds with one stone. But I was around the Cruz presidential campaign when they were working on their ballot access strategy, and man, I mean, the number of cogs that got to move for you to be talking about all these states that you're getting on the ballot for and all have different deadlines and different sets of rules. I mean, it just gave me a headache talking to those guys and just hearing what they were having to do to figure that process out. And that's where, in a lot of these cases with bigger efforts, it absolutely pays to bring in some folks that know the game and know how to do this, just like you guys.
Right. And sometimes you can do it on your own, other times not. You can even get the advice of a firm. You don't necessarily have to hire them, but bring them on as just some very limited consulting to make sure you're doing things right. But planning for the worst is, I would say, that right up there after following the rules, and that you just have to expect it's going to be harder than you think. You may have months to get this done. Of course, most people procrastinate by their nature, and it's just easy to get into a bind where now you're looking at how many signatures do I need per day to make it.
Yeah.
And often when you're into that scenario, things can get very expensive and very stressful quickly to make up lost ground, and so you just always need to approach it with bringing maximum resources to bear, do more than whatever we think we need, do twice as much, or at least 50% more in respect to the number of circulators you have, the number of volunteers you have, and get it done as quickly as you can. Waiting to the end is the perfect way to fail. And so just front-loading the project and putting out as much effort as you can early to get it done quickly is the name of the game. And successful campaigns do that. The ones that fail are the ones that try to scrimp and save and okay, can we do it cheaply to start, and then it's not working, we try a couple different things, versus just applying everything we can to getting it done early and fast. Those two approaches, the latter is what will succeed. The other one is iffy and often will not. And in the signature gathering is a zero-sum game. You either make it or you don't.
Yeah, it's a very bright line between success and failure when it comes to those kind of petitions.
Few things are like that in life, but this is one. And there's no bonus points. There's no awards for second place. If you don't make it, it's all that effort was for nothing. And I have been involved in those. And it's easy to get cocky once you've had a bunch of successes in signature gathering, and then you hit a goose egg and you regret it, and you think about all the different things you could have done differently, because it is horrible to work so much effort and then have nothing to show for it, which is what happens if you screw up a signature gathering effort. But
yeah, for candidates, I mean, when you're getting involved, I always tell them, look, one of the first things you got to do is you got to find out the rules. In Texas, a lot of times you have an option of gathering signatures or paying a filing fee, and in general, like for a local office here in Texas that has those boundaries on it, most of the time what I tell folks is like, look, make sure you have the money for the filing fee, but go try to get the signatures. Combine it with your ID phase. You can do that over a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but make sure you have that money so that if things go slower, if you get into a bind, you've got that siloed so that you can go ahead and just pay the thing and make sure you're on the ballot, because there's no coming back from that. If the filing deadline passes and you haven't fulfilled the requirements, your race is over. And that's one of the most embarrassing things. I mean, there's a lot of ways to run a race and lose and run it well, and you can come back from that. Having the guy that has all the newspaper stories written about how they couldn't follow the simple rules to get on the ballot is a pretty good way to just end your career right there.
It is. No, if you can't manage your campaign properly, why on earth are the voters going to hire you to be in the legislature or go to Congress?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love to tell candidates is like, look, your campaign is a microcosm of what voters can expect from you. So this means that the thing, how you run it, how you treat your staff, your efficiency, your attention to what voters care about, and your willingness to listen, this is kind of your dating phase, right? If you're going to treat them badly during the dating phase, why in the world do they think you're going to make a good elected official that's going to be responsive to them and treat them well? That's just not going to happen. And they're sure not going to assume that. So you've got to go out there and do everything possible and have the best version of you on display, and make sure you're ingraining in yourself these good habits for building relationships, communicating well, and putting that idea of service first. And if you're doing that, voters are going to see it. But if you're not able to follow simple rules and get things done like getting on the ballot, if you're not able to treat people well, not able to listen, then they're sure not going to assume you're going to find the ability to do all this once you get elected.
Well said. You're exactly right. And the ballot access is easy in some places, difficult in others. If you're in a difficult state, reach out to someone that has experience doing this, and don't make any assumptions. Assume it's a lot harder than you think it is, and bring in professionals that know what they're doing to help.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the first steps, if a candidate's trying to figure out how they get on the ballot, generally speaking, the party they affiliate with has some resources through the state party. And there's also going to be through the Secretary of State or the State Elections Administrator. They typically have a packet that you can download that you can ask for. That's going to give you at least the rough details as far as what's required, what the options are. And then from there, if you have a need or have questions, you're able to go and you can go find a lawyer or find somebody like you, Lee, who has expertise in that specific field that can give you some advice on pitfalls, on needs that you might have, and how to actually approach that battle. Is that kind of how you recommend folks go about it?
Yes. Elections offices with different levels, city, county, state, those people usually are readily available by phone or go into their office, and you can get all kinds of free advice from them. They're the experts. They're doing this day in and day out. So as far as I'm concerned, the holy Bible of politics in terms of what those rules are, I always start with in our case, the Secretary of State's office, usually most of the time I'm working with. I befriend them, and lots of emails are exchanged. I love to get things in writing in terms of what the rules are and what aren't. Some states aren't nearly as open with their advice, and they'll say, well, you got to talk to your lawyer about that. But always try that first, because you can usually get almost everything you need to know between their website and the forms and publications they have, but then following up with phone calls to the people in the elections office, confirming your questions and making sure you're on the right track. That is, again, one of just the most basic of steps of a campaign is to start out on the right foot.
So let's shift a little bit over to the grassroots organizing side. You and I got to work together earlier this year supporting Greg Gianforte's special election, and definitely very heavy on the grassroots side with doing door knocking and block walking throughout Montana. You've done this across the country, primarily focused up there in the Northwest. What are some of those things that campaigns need to be laying out early as far as those first preparatory steps in order to run a really good grassroots operation?
Keeping track of your volunteers, building, everything comes back to lists of volunteers, list of donors,
mm-hmm.
And every interaction you have with people who may be a supporter, documenting that and building your database. I work with databases, from morning till night in our company, and a campaign needs to be doing the same. And your phone list, your email list, all of that. So that is the organizing. You can't even begin to do anything unless you have lists and a database. So that is fundamental, and that work never stops. You're always refining and fine-tuning and adding to your lists as you move forward through the campaign. And so I start there, and the volunteer activity, it's always the genie in the bottle. How do you get them? And often, you and I, as we're involved, we're being hired to bring in people to go door to door. That's where we were working together.
Yeah.
And not that there weren't volunteers helping that candidate, but when you need to cover tens of thousands of doors in a few days, you just can't do that with volunteers. Right. You have to hire professionals who can hit 100 doors in a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's resources like that. But obviously, if you can get volunteer activity, that is the most wonderful thing. It just can be hard to invent. It's candidate-driven often, or issue-driven, and it can be hard to manufacture that. But if you have it, and if you got a candidate that has a lot of volunteers, a lot of supporters, is a great speaker, and goes to events that get people motivated and signed up, well, capitalizing on a good volunteer plan, in terms of what you're doing with them every step of the way is key. And then my aspect is often helping to provide some of those paid resources, whether it's paid canvassing, paid phone call, and so on, which help to fill in the gaps of what you're not able to do with volunteers.
Yeah, I always encourage candidates to start out by, similar to a fundraising plan and fundraising pitch for donors, to build out a similar plan for volunteers, because especially when you start talking about people that volunteer every cycle. So like here around the Fort Worth area, we got a bunch of people that volunteer every given election cycle for different candidates, but they got a lot of choices as far as where they put their hours. And as a candidate, you want them to work with you. You want them to put the vast majority of their available time into your campaign and making sure you win. And so you're talking about, just like a donor can put their dollars in any number of different pots for candidates, volunteers have the same choice to make. And so you got to make a pitch to volunteers if you want to get those folks in that shows them where they're able to provide value, why you need them, and you got to take that survey research information that we talked about earlier to be able to figure out what do they care about and what are the issues that are going to move them. Because the same issues in many cases that are similar issues to what moves the voters, the people that want to volunteer, you got to get those folks in there in a similar way. And so if you're able to build a plan for how to actually captivate some of that volunteer energy and make sure they come to you rather than somebody else's campaign, that's a really, really great starting point, because it's really tough to get enough of it. You can never have, I've never been in a race, even with a lot of volunteers, that I had as much as I wanted to. I would always ask for more.
That's right. And just like with the funding, almost never does the campaign have too much money. It happens every once in a while, but very rarely.
Yeah, I love using volunteers, but there is that place that is for the paid effort side, and that's something the paid walker is something that I do, that you do, that there are a lot of great vendors across the country that help facilitate that, and it's a great way. I really encourage campaigns is like, look, you need to have a good organic program, because that should be running throughout the campaign as far as being able to have people out at the doors, whether it's volunteers, staff, having some of that organic push. But there's really an important side when it comes to, especially when around get out the vote or with getting actual ballot access coming in close to deadlines there, where if you got to get 10,000 doors knocked in the last 2 weeks of the election, good luck trying to get enough volunteers to do that. That's going to be really tough, especially if you've only been knocking maybe a couple hundred doors a week prior to it. All of a sudden, you've got to find that surge, and bringing in outside folks, having a good vendor that can come in and have rock stars on the ground that can be your evangelists throughout your district can be a huge help, and make sure that you're able to do that. And you say, look, okay, go knock these doors. I need 10,000 of them. Go. And then you can focus on some of these other areas. I mean, it's not cheap, but it can be very, very effective if you got a good, reputable vendor doing it.
And this is exactly how I got my start in all of this. Was that I was involved in volunteer activities. We couldn't get enough volunteers, so I decided it was easier to raise the money to hire people to work in the phone bank. You had your volunteers, but it was easier than to hire people to sit there and do this for 5, 6, 7 hours, doing those get out the vote calls the final 5 days when it's so important. That was a strategy that could actually be successful. Filling the phone bank with hundreds of volunteers just was impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of how I've just got into this in the first place, from a paid standpoint, putting dollars to use, hiring people to do the calls, do the doors, to be effective. And it's volunteerism is wonderful, but most of the time, that extra help, especially in tight races or races where you're behind.
Right. Well, and oftentimes the support, especially in forms of dollars, comes in waves, and being able to have something where you can put those dollars immediately to have an impact. There are a few things that are better. I mean, you look at the Get Out the Vote Bible by Green and Gerber, and all the different resources out there. There's few things, if anything, that moves voters more than actually having a conversation at the door, that actually talking to a live person on the phone or in person, and being able to have the ability to take the dollars that you get and put them directly into the field with an effective voter contact plan. You're not going to be able to surge with the money that comes in if you're just talking about volunteers. But you can put that in the field with a good vendor. What are some of the things, as folks are, if they're looking at doing paid efforts like that, what are some of the hallmarks that they should be looking for in a vendor that they're working with?
Transparency is really important. You need to be able to know how many people they have out in the field, what they're saying, how many doors they're actually knocking. The most basic kind of quality control in terms of even though someone says they knocked the door, did they really do it? And there's software out there that helps you to do that with GPS tracking through their phones and et cetera. But those are a few of the things. But it all comes back basically to transparency, in that you're hiring people to do this work for you, and you got to make sure that it's being done right. And you have to do that because a vendor that knows that the campaign is looking over their shoulder is a vendor that will dot every I and cross every T. And if you're lackadaisical and you're not looking, I've just seen this too many times. It's easy to have a vendor that doesn't put their best foot forward and work as hard as they could. So oversight, transparency are key to any kind of a paid operation, and not just taking what the vendor tells you for granted, but doing some steps to make sure that it is really getting done, and your flyers aren't just ending up in a trash can, that they're really hitting those doors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're paying a fair amount of money, in many cases a large amount of money, for these doors to get hit. The campaign wants to know it's really having an impact, and they're having conversations. I mean, tracking that data. And from the vendor side, when I'm doing it, I want the client to ask me questions. I want them to be checking things and ask me, hey, what does this mean? Because the last thing I want to have happen is for there to be a seed of doubt or a question that they don't put out there. And so from my position, I know you do the same thing. Try to have as much transparency as possible from the very beginning and encourage those questions. So if there's ever a question that they have, they know they can come to me and that I want them to bring it to me so I can answer it. Because I'm wanting a long-term relationship with these folks, right? I mean, you want to be working for these folks cycle after cycle. And the way you do that is building trust. And I mean, they're putting a lot of faith in us when we're doing that work for them. And, frankly, there's more than a few vendors out there that do this kind of stuff that don't have that love of transparency. And that's why people like us have the ability to have such a big impact and get so many clients, is that there's a pretty narrow field of trusted operators that do the right thing over and over again. And so it makes for a nice market opportunity for us. But I always like to make sure candidates know is like, look, you got to be looking over the shoulder and asking questions, even if you trust them. Make sure you're doing that, because it's going to help you understand more about your campaign. Like I've many times put together the reports for clients, and I try to be exhaustive about the what I give them as far as the important data and making sure they can see everything about what we've been doing. And if you don't go through those things, one, you're not going to really have confidence in the effort. And two, there's so much great information in those reports that your vendor is going to give you about what they're hearing on the ground, what the responses are at the door, what they're seeing, what they're feeling, the stuff that you can't quantify, those intangibles. That's incredibly valuable to your campaign. It ties back into that survey research side we talked about at the beginning. Making sure you're taking all that information and you're actually taking action on it within the rest of your campaign is huge.
I agree completely. And I think anybody listening to you, this is how you win, and this is the nuts and bolts that are the difference between losing campaigns and winning campaigns.
So you guys at Triton Research and Polling, you do the survey stuff, you do the survey research for campaigns, nonprofits, and companies, and you guys still do some of this other stuff with the ballot access and with the grassroots and door-to-door stuff. But are those the three main areas you guys operate?
Yes, that is almost insane to have our hands in so many different things.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
It is. The ballot access projects are very seasonal, kind of timed to the election cycle, and we're very choosy in terms of what we do. The stuff we do regarding surveys, market research, that is most of our work, and we take on other projects as they come. But we love to do surveys. Got a really good team. One aspect I haven't mentioned just about our company is that we own our own call center. We have our own employees. Most polling and survey companies outsource all of their field work. They hire other call centers to do that for them. And we do it all in-house, which gives us complete control over the whole process, from writing the questions to quality control with our interviewers, our callers, to make sure that every survey is done correctly, that they're asking the questions the way they're supposed to be asked. And then on the data side, we know that everything's being coded properly, because we're over the shoulder of each one of our employees, making sure they're doing it right. So we can tell our clients this is where you are. This data is accurate, because we know that it was. Our hand was involved in every part of that step. When you outsource the field work, the calling, that survey company can't say that for sure. They hope so, and maybe they did some quality control, but they hope. A lot of hope involved in that. Versus we know, and so that's one thing that sets us apart from most of our competitors, and that also allows us to do it a lot cheaper, because we're not hiring a call center that's trying to make a profit off of just doing the calls.
Right.
We go through all this effort with our own employees, hiring and managing them, training them, but we pass that savings in a sense on to our clients, because we're able to do it. We're doing that basically at our cost, the field work, and which a typical survey that we're in bidding with other companies, and almost always we're the cheapest. Not always, but often, and that is a real reason why is we got lower cost, because we operate our own facility.
Well, there are so many variables that you can't control for within within survey research, and that are out there that are at least difficult to control for, even if you can. And being able to have folks like yourself and your team that are able to be meticulous about every step of the process, from the creation, the wording, the questions, to the execution, and then the analysis. And having it all in-house is a definite advantage that you guys bring to the table, and I think it shows in the results you get and the way you're able to help your clients. Where can folks go if they want to find out more information about what you guys do and might need some help on the ballot access, grassroots, or the survey and research?
Our website's tritonpolling.com. You just plug us into Google, it comes right up, and our 800 number's on there. We try to answer every phone call. So we would love to talk to anyone out there that's interested in the things we do. And even if it's just to ask some questions, we're here as a resource and would love to work with your listeners.
Perfect. Well, Lee, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's great to be able to share this information with our listeners, and I definitely hope that some of them reach out because you've got a wealth of more information you can give them when you got some specifics about the races they're looking at and the things that they might be needing. So I hope you guys that are listening will check that out. Thank you all for downloading the episode this week. Make sure you check out the show notes for links to Lee's website and his content information on social media. And if you get a chance, go to iTunes and leave us a pretty nice 5-star rating. I would appreciate that, and that'll be a huge help as we try to spread the word about the How to Run for Office podcast. Thank you guys again, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.